Hey guys, I'm Coach D, and I promised you guys I would get you some information on flexibility and mobility. So this will be kind of part two in our series on flexibility and mobility. I'm back at the house. Did my workout, did my WOD this evening. A little bit cooled down already, but thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to talk about flexibility and mobility, as I promised I would do so today. Great to have all you guys this evening, and hopefully we'll get some information out to you that'll help you progress in your flexibility and mobility program. I think that the number one thing we want to emphasize are basically some general principles that you can use that are specific to that part of your training. Whether you're training for just general fitness, recreation, activities of daily living like your lifestyle, or whether you're training for a specific event, a CrossFit competitor, triathlete, ultramarathoner, marathoner, whatever the case, strength athlete, weightlifting athlete, whatever the case is. The number one thing I think we all need to recognize is that flexibility and mobility has to be a part of every training program, just as much as you would work strength, speed, power, endurance, stamina. Throughout your program, you need to have a specific program for flexibility and mobility. I have to admit, this is an area where some individuals are going to be more flexible than others. In general, you can find people way up into their 60s, 70s, 80s, even their 90s that they still maintain fairly good flexibility. Some of this is genetically oriented. Some people are more flexible than others based on just the type of collagen that their body's made up, basically body measurements, their general genetics. So for me, flexibility has always been something that I've had to work on. I was a competitive gymnast, then went into working out in gyms, kind of a muscle head type mentality, lifting weights, real low level bodybuilding, and then cross training, and then eventually got into doing CrossFit later in my career, in my life. And so what I found was that I had a lot of tightnesses, I had a lot of immobility in joints from years of gymnastics I didn't recognize was really there because I never really challenged it. CrossFit, as we all know, exposes your weaknesses. So one of my weaknesses was a lot of joint hypomobility, a lot of ligamentous and capsular tightness, and also just muscle length, and some preset patterns of movement. Because the type of job that I had, even though I'm a physical therapist and I'm on my feet a lot and I work with patients a lot, I still did a lot of sitting throughout the day in that forward bent, non-productive posture. So, I think the number one thing that I want you guys to get tonight, as this is the first in our series of any videos, is that your mobility and flexibility program needs to have specific measurements. It needs to be something that is written and that is simplistic. You need to, basically, number one, you need to have written goals in your flexibility, just like you do every other fitness capacity or fitness endeavor area. Number two, it needs to be simple. My experience has been with most athletes, if it's not simple, if it's too complex, if there's too much mobility stuff going on, if you've got 5 exercise or 5 dynamic stretches or 5 joint modes for one joint, and you've got multiple joints that you're servicing, then it's going to take you forever. It's not going to be efficient enough for you to want to do it. So it needs to be simple, maybe 1-2 stretches per problem joint. Work on those, get those down, and then move on. Number 3, it needs to be something that you do on a regular basis. It needs to be consistent. And it needs to be something that you have a way to track your progress. It could be through watching the functional movement that's developed out of the flexibility or mobility, or it could be the stretching measurement itself. Maybe you've improved in the stretching measurement and you've increased your long sitting position, your spine position in long sitting. Maybe you've improved your shoulder mobility in being able to go overhead with a bar, and you have a measurement to do that. So we'll show you and talk to you about some of those ways to measure that. That'll make it easy to see, wow, this is improved or this isn't, or it's the same. So So let's talk about some general principles when it comes to flexibility and mobility. We know that flexibility is the ability of a particular tissue to lengthen or shorten within its available range of motion. And then mobility is the ability to use whatever flexibility you have. So the key to your flexibility and mobility program is to improve flexibility and mobility over time in a linear progression. Okay, we want to continue to improve it. Now there are some athletes that have too much mobility, too much flexibility, and we want to develop stability, and we talked a little bit about that in one of the flexibility series, talking about stability versus mobility and flexibility. And so I think the important thing to recognize here is that your daily workouts, your WODs, whatever you do, need to be structured with flexibility and mobility in them every single day for it to be consistent, for it to become a habit and part of your training. This is one area where you do want to be consistent, where constant variance is good to introduce new activities, but we need to stay in some activities for a while where we're going to progress, get to a point of improvement, and then move on to the next level. So we do want some level of consistency in this area, even though in some of our training, in some of the modes that we train, the ways that we train, we do want some constant variance, so there's general physical preparedness that's developed. One of the things I think that's extremely important here is how and when flexibility and mobility are performed. So let's just talk about that. Basically, my general premise with all of our athletes and our clients is this, and myself. The first thing I want to do is I want to warm up. And I'm going to warm up with dynamic mobility prior to my WOD, okay? And that means that I'm not going to really focus on flexibility prior to the WOD. Flexibility is the ability of that joint to move through its full excursion, and then use that through activity and mobility. But I'm more concerned in the dynamic portion of the warm-up prior to the WOD with basically just increasing body temperature, increasing blood flow to tissue, increasing the neurological firing of that tissue and getting it ready for work. There's actually been some recent studies, a study in 2012 done that showed that stretching prior to work that involved peak power, time to peak power and performance, strength and speed, that stretching actually inhibits performance. So the traditional school of thought is to do a lot of stretching beforehand, but what my recommendation would be to do a dynamic warm-up. And I like to say, get a sweat on before getting a sweat on. You need to be ready to go, ready for work, primed. Your body needs to be heated up and ready to do its job. Then you're going to do your WOD, and then after that we'll focus on flexibility and increasing that flexibility. So before the WOD, that dynamic mobility is really designed to allow you to get to your maximum mobility, okay, or flexibility that you already have attained. Not necessarily improve it, but to reach your maximum mobility and flexibility that you already have attained. So that's going to have come from prior stretching, prior workouts, and you may be stiff that day. You may have done, back squats and deads the day before, and a Metcon, and you go to do your dynamic warm-up, and your hamstrings are lit up, your glutes are lit up, your quads are lit up, your whole lower quarters lit up, and so you need to stretch that out, loosen that tissue out, and get it ready for work. You don't want to work out without loosening those elements. And then at the same time, it's important to recognize that there are some times prior to a workout where I might do some specific flexibility work for static positions during lifts. And a good example might be the front squat rack position, where I might want to work on the front squat rack position prior to doing front squats or thrusters or something, just because I need to get those arms up in that position and get ready to do work. So I might do some flexibility beforehand, but really that's just to be able to get into a static position and hold it during a particular movement, like the front squat, where the lower quarter is doing most of the work, the trunk's doing most of the work, and your arms are basically just helping to hold that bar in that front rack position so you can perform work. That's a little different than stretching out your hamstrings, your hip flexors, and everything else prior to work. That stretching may actually inhibit triple extension and weightlifting, or inhibit speed and power in the hips. So dynamic mobility first, dynamic movement first, heat it up, and get a sweat on before getting a sweat on. Secondly, do your WOD, do your work, okay? We can do some flexibility up front, mostly for static positioning, getting into the right position of lifts, okay? And then last but not least, we want to then do flexibility afterwards when we've got a sweat on, we've done some work, and then we're going to go through basically 6 different degrees of flexibility, which we'll talk about next session, and we're going to work our flexibility after the WOD. That flexibility work can be done in a varying different types of groups of stretching. It can be done dynamic, it can be done static, it can be done dynamic active, dynamic passive, it can be done static active, static passive, with or without pain threshold, and then it can be done like contract relax oriented. It can be done also through PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And so there's a lot of different methods to stretch. But again, I would say that the key here is keep it simple. Make it be something that you can do on a regular basis, that you understand, and that you can apply to that particular joint of interest. You get 5 or 6 different stretches for one joint, one body area, you get confused, you don't know which one to apply, how to apply it, so forth and so on. So keep it simple. That period after the WOD is really designed to focus on increasing your range of motion. And any other individual sessions where you might go out and do a run, you get a sweat on, you come in and you do some flexibility work, then that would be the time where you might want to work on basically getting more and more flexibility in joints that you presently don't have enough flexibility in. And that's a little different than just doing mobility work. And so my experience has been, if you're going to get flexibility back in your joints and back in your connective tissue, you're going to have to do it with every single workout. And then there's going to be some days where you're going to have to do some select flexibility work with problem areas, and you're going to have to focus on those areas. So what we're going to do on our next visit is we're going to discuss the different types of stretching. We're going to go through some basic stretches for problem areas at the hip, knees, ankles, shoulders, and wrist. You can also go on to several other websites. The Mobility WOD is a great website. If you want to read a great book, Thomas Kurt's book on scientifically stretching is a fabulous book. There's just a lot of good information and literature out there. And then we also want to remember that whatever we do, we want to make sure that we're doing it safely. We want to promote health, that's the key. And we want it to be something that has some functional application, and not just do it for the sake of doing it. So you guys have a great evening, and thanks for being here this evening.